to start off, just staying with Juan's presentation and trust. So this recent PwC report that came out, the big numbers for the sharing economy, $15 billion worth today, 300 plus in 2025. But they're also reporting that trust is declining. And we're seeing all of these companies that rely on trust doing so well. So the numbers that they report is like only 30% of the people actually feel like they trust more than previously. So where is that disconnect? We see sharing economies companies doing so well and trust is declining. What are your thoughts?
You want to start? Okay. So actually, we have a lot of data about this. I don't know how the PwC data was collected. If it was a survey, it's likely to be biased, just by the question itself. I will have to review that. We have real data. We have scraped websites like these guys. But we have also scraped websites like BlaBlaCar, etc. And the average rating of a BlaBlaCar user is 4.87. Super high ratings of quality. I think that what people are being educated about is that they actually want to see those ratings.
Right.
And that's why, can you trust anyone? No, but if I see the ratings, yes. And I think we'll have to educate, especially, as I mentioned, the old people, the old people who have not been part of this hipster wave early on, to help them understand that.
I think the other thing is sort of like how much information you share. Right. One part about trust is that like the more information you share, the easier it is for someone to trust you. And this started from like the social network times, right? Like, if you look 10 years back, the idea of sharing the kinds of photos and stuff that you on publicly on social networks, unheard of, right? But we're now sort of increasingly bolder of sharing of information. Like I can share my profile, who I am, fine, anyone can know it, my photos on Instagram, where I am, when I check in on Foursquare. That allows a lot more trust to be built simply because people are more willing to share information publicly that previously was not there.
Right, and I think, also to Juan's point, I think there is a greater trust in like collective trust. So I trust more than I trust you. I probably trust your rating, like that your 5 or 4.8 rating. I may not trust you because I don't have interaction with you, but I trust the collective decision of the crowd in opting for your services. So that's also, I think somewhere that might figure in. And to your point, like we're opening up so much. So do you think there's differences regionally in how people open up with your experiences with Airbnb? Are regional differences like Asia versus US versus Europe?
Yeah.
How much people are willing to put out there?
One interesting area of differences is around like when it comes to very objective type ratings, like stars, for example, right? So in certain cultures, 5 stars is something that you give. You come from the US, 5 stars, yeah, US 5 stars. Japanese culture, 4 stars is awesome. Like that's I'm waiting for the 5. I'm not going to give the 5. So there's a bit of that tension around like how people rate differently across different cultures. And when you think about marketplace, there's some inherent like risk involved, right? So if you are a host and you've been getting 5 stars all this while, like all right, there's this Japanese guy coming. Like, is there a risk to my profile if I sort of have it a little bit lower? So that's the challenge around like having an objective rating system that's interpreted differently in different cultures.
Okay.
Yeah, that's part of the research we have been doing as well. We found, for example, that Russians are actually very, very difficult. They give each other 3-star ratings for perfectly valid, jobs that you would give 5, right? So you really have to be looking at the statistical validity of that from maybe graphs, not just a metric.
Right, and that's very interesting because you have global, travelers, looking at Airbnb rentals across the world, and different ratings could mean different things. So that's just something to keep in mind, definitely. So, one thing that struck me, when you were talking, negative publicity, negative reputation, social media is open, everything is open out there. Can we come out of that negative rating? especially for like the Airbnb hosts or other sharing economy participants. Can we come out of that? How easy is it to come out of a negative rating?
Yeah, the way we set it up is that like on Airbnb, only if you've traveled, you can actually leave a review. So only if you've stayed with the host, you can actually leave a review. And hosts are typically very protective about their reputation. Right? It's a signal around like future business and so on. So whenever they get a negative review, the first thing they do is call up our customer service hotline. Can I have this removed? I've been a great customer. Like change this. This guy was totally unreasonable, but we never let them do that. Right? But what we do provide though is a opportunity for them to respond to that specific comment and rating and explain the circumstances. So when you look through the rating, you sort of say like, hey, positive, not such a great rating, but there's a response from the host. And then it's your choice to sort of say like, okay, do I feel like this guy is a reasonable host? And the fact that the air conditioner, like there was a power failure, is that his fault? And should I be concerned and so on? So there's a bit of providing the opportunity for the host to give back information is a critical part of it.
And then other people to make a decision based on that and open information, right?
Well, I have one question. Is reputation in this case more important than the money that you're transacting for that specific service?
It can be for some people. So I'm sure you have better data than me about that. But I think that people would be willing to return the whole money of the transaction just to get the negative star removed, for sure. We have seen people be willing to pay hundreds of dollars to get something removed.
Because I had an experience, for example, when I did things on Elance and freelance, people will probably like not go and ask me for money first. They'll say go and really put your recommendation that I've done a good job, and then money you can figure that out later.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because people have a different understanding of like the value of reputation. Those who are more sophisticated about it, like really understand the long-term value of it. And they're, if something goes wrong as a host, they're very, very upfront about saying like, fine, free stay or whatever. They'll go out their way to sort of pay out for it, like take the responsibility for it. And there are those who sort of say like, as a principle, right? No, right? Write what you want, but like this is what it is. So people perceive different value in terms of the long-term value of reputation.
And also in the end, it goes, I think, it's on the individual as well. I remember like in Copenhagen, we had the whole Airbnb for the team, and the guy was really upfront. He said, like, the table is very sensitive, like to the water or whatever. But he said, don't worry about it. That could be fixed. And for some reason, we just left the pot. It was just like water was going to it, and it kind of created this moist, like a black moist. And I was freaking out because the table was really nice. And I said, before I left, I said, listen, man, I took a picture. I said, this is what I've done to your table. And the guy said, oh, don't worry, we can fix that. I was like, I tried to fix it for like 2 hours. But I think it's like, again, it goes on an individual basis more.
And that experience is very interesting because in a hotel, you would not care. If you break something, you just leave.
That is so true.
You understand that there is a lasting relationship between, even in this ephemeral transaction, there is a lasting relationship that has to do with what we live in each other's reputations. A lot more than in a hotel where you break something, broke it, right?
Right, and that's very interesting. Anybody in the audience have a question related to, the trust currency that Juan spoke about, or?
I'm also asking questions on Twitter, so just ask questions on Twitter. There's a hashtag for CSW Global 15.
Is there a way to keep track of people who are giving everybody negative ratings and making their lives miserable?
We're actually working on that, and that's what I mentioned in my last sentence. The rate the rater is you have to look at reviewing the person who is making giving bad ratings to everyone. And in fact, the way we measure it at Traity is all the ratings that you give are compared to all the other ratings you have given. So if you are giving to everyone a 5, it's like, well, for you the standard is 5. If you give to somebody a 4, that's pretty bad, right? So we try to assess, where is your benchmark of good and bad.
What about rivalries and black ops? Because we've already started seeing some of that. How do you spot them, and then what would you recommend to people who have to deal with that?
So I mean, I think depending on the platforms, it can be quite different. So on open platforms like TripAdvisor and so on, there's always these stories around, people sending people to give negative reviews because you don't have to do a transaction. In slightly more transactional platforms like Airbnb, where it's a bit of closed loop, it's harder to game. You actually need to stay there. You still could really do it if you want, but it's not so easy. A lot of this comes down to analytics. So people spend a lot of time and a lot of data scientists on the topic of looking at patterns, trying to just text mining to sort of see like which kind of reviews are fraudulent and so on. I'm sure Juan has a lot more experience in this.
No, I would say something similar. We're doing a similar type of work to understand that, and we go in the same direction as well. Semantic analytics, we try to understand what's really going on when people recommend or not recommend each other.
I have a question about this. What do you think about organization or the companies that you are working with this and working with their open APIs? Do you think that will solve the problem also?
Can you be more specific?
Yeah, so for example, like, Uber is focusing a lot, like really now, like really even they announced like the guy who's going to handle the APIs programs. So being more specific on like, okay, how now the community is building on stuff on top of these crowd networks, crowd companies. Like, do you think this is like a next stage that is going to really solve a lot of that problem? Because, I mean, we have to look at it, okay, this is coming, and it's coming big. Like next 3 years, we have billion people coming to all these networks. So, something, we need to really make sure that it's in place. So are you working something in that area?
So, I mean, I think that what we're going to see with those type of APIs, and I'm actually waiting for Airbnb to release their APIs one day.
When is that? When is that happening? JJ, come on.
I think that the whole idea of having like different trust providers and trust platforms is the right direction to go. It's not clear. It's not necessarily clear like which and how it should be set up. Like, should it be aggregators like you guys? Should it be governments? How should it be set up? But we're definitely interested to see like how this space is evolving. I think like having a neutral third party is definitely the way to go. And if we can find one or a few providers, we're definitely willing to work with that.
And I think that those APIs, what they will enable is a lot more complex transactions. Today, your transaction with Uber is, I want to drive from here to here. Those APIs are going to enable incredibly more complex transactions like, I want my kids, as soon as they get out of the school, to be picked up by this cab. In fact, it's a very specific one that they know, or out of a pool of people I know, to be taken to my grandmother's place. Those transactions are going to start to happen, and it will connect, maybe even that reputation from many different players that could happen in a single transaction, connected by many platforms. Maybe Airbnb connected to Trip4Real, connected to Uber, to do one single transaction that is what the user really wants. And then it will be, okay, something bad happens, who has fault for that, right? So we'll have to understand that. I think that's today the biggest companies are still very focused on their own verticals, which makes a lot of sense. I think that we'll start to see horizontality soon with things like with what Uber is doing, right?
Interesting.
Cool. So, it was a very interesting thought that you mentioned that, and Epi mentioned that he was concerned while staying at Airbnb, he's concerned about treating a stranger's property with respect. And so do you think we share better with strangers than the people we know? We are on our best behavior. We're just more aware of not not hurting this other person or their property. And is that also kind of helping the sharing economy in some way? Reputation concerns. So how this and the culture, are some people better at the sharing economy in certain geographical areas than others? Is that something that you've seen?
I think it's more a spectrum, right? So on one end of the spectrum, you're transacting, highly personal. You're staying in your aunt's place. You know you're going to take out of the place, otherwise your whole family hear about it. It's a reputation risk. On the other end of the spectrum, you're transacting with a corporation, right? It's a hotel, highly impersonal. You could potentially even treat the people there not so well. You take the towels, you take the stuff, right? On one hand of things, simply because it's a spectrum between a personal relationship to one that's like one with a corporation. It's not a person. I'm not hurting anyone. So there's a bit of an innate thing around like, no one gets hurt if you do something in that space. The sharing economy sits somewhere in between, where it's not really a company. There's some level of like social thing set up by Airbnb and platform companies. But there's also a realization that like when you get there, it's this person, and you do start to feel like a bit more towards the, it's like your aunt's place. So you do, once you establish the fact that on the other side of the table is another person, that's where like the level of responsibility, the level of trust changes quite a bit.
So I think I would connect this with, for example, micro lending or even peer-to-peer lending, which is you can actually measure very clearly the comparison between, do you care about your friends, do you care about strangers, or do you care about corporations, right? Clearly, the highest default rate in the banking industry is with corporations. Lending Club has much lower default rates than a big bank, right? This has to do, for a similar risk, for a similar level of risk, of course. This has to do with people understanding that they are hurting other people, right? I think that's very human. There is another company, very interesting, that they just got invested by Andreessen Horowitz called Paddle in the US, and they do lending. It's like Lending Club for groups of friends. So I think that their default rate is like 0. Because, if we lend money to each other, it's what I mentioned earlier about the closed network, right? In a closed network, you cannot commit any kind of fraud. Open networks are where fraud can happen. In a closed network, it's very difficult. If you commit any kind of fraud, you disappear from that network, and then it will be up to, okay, what was the value of that group of friends? Maybe you were you hated all your friends anyway, and you wanted to escape them anyway. But that's not typically the case. So I think that we see a whole spectrum of that, and clearly, I think that it's very human, actually.
But also, I have also another point, and I relate this crowdfunding part, right? So a lot of questions that I have from people, okay, they said like, oh, what happens if you don't deliver the product, right? Well, if you're going to have like 1,000 backers or 10,000 backers, and you're not delivering the product, people come from all over the world. You got no place in this earth to hide, So it's kind of, I say like, the crowd can give you a heart attack, if you're really not going to really come to delivery.
That actually comes to the final stage when I spoke about my presentation, the layer of insurance. The layer of insurance is when you don't have to worry about reputation. You guys have a good policy with Lloyd's of London, I believe, no, for $1 million, something like that. Uber has their own policy as well. All the big platforms have an insurance policy to
make
say,
sure,
well, even if reputation didn't work, which should eliminate most of the problems anyway, this is still behind.
Which I think in Airbnb's case, this was like make and break, when that thing happened in, was it San Francisco or LA or New York? I'm not sure, but in New York, yeah, when someone just went and break the whole entire apartment and turned around to. We have one question on Twitter. Osama Manzar, is localized travel and real estate agencies harming the reputation of Airbnb? Sorry, what? Is localized travel and real estate agencies harming the reputation of Airbnb?
So I interpret the question as like, are like people who manage property groups and manage a lot of different properties ruining the reputation of Airbnb. So we do have, because it's an open platform, we do have people who are entrepreneurial and they start taking up different properties. So in Bali, for example, is a great example. They go up and talk to the different villa owners and say like, hey, I can send you people to stay, and I can be the sort of the middleman, and they are the ones who sort of, be the conduit for the transactions. What we found is that like it depends on the person and depends on the entrepreneur, right? Sometimes they provide a great service. They are the ones they take real responsibility into checking the guy in, making sure they know how to use the hot water, what the services around and places to go. And some of them are running it too much as a business, and it's also like go do it. It's your problem. I've connected to you guys, and they try to just be pretty much hands off on it. So instead of sort of saying like, are they good or bad? I think one, particularly in Asia, this is a pretty interesting area of entrepreneurship, and the fact that like people who do not have access to assets can still benefit from a platform like this. I think that's still interesting. The second part of it is to deal on this on a case-to-case basis. So if it's the guy is providing a bad experience, you will see it from the bad reviews, and over time we either downrank them or take them off the platform, right? So I think that's where the reputation comes into play. But the whole idea of, are they good or bad by itself is not, there's no real answer to that. It's just a matter of like how you deal with them. They can be really good, and it could be really beneficial.
How much more time do we have?
10 minutes.
10 minutes? All right, so probably we'll ask 2 more questions, but I'm going to take one more question from Twitter. how do you get more people to rate services and create a feedback culture?
I think that the platform has a big say in that. I mean, a platform like Airbnb is fantastic at that. You know, they will remind you every 2 days until you actually put the review, right? Uber is by default. You cannot order the next Uber until you have given the star rating to the previous person. I think that other platforms are not so good. I mean, there are platforms that they don't force you to do that at all, and people who are lazy are just not going to do that. I mean, even for example, for hotels booking, I think that I have only given one review in my life, and it was a very negative review to a very bad hotel I was very unhappy about. The reason for that is I'm not forced to do that. I think that platforms can do a good job at forcing users to create more of those ratings.
There's some element of technical stuff. So like you create the product such that like it's easier, it's more seamless, it comes out on your phone and so on. And then the other half of it is also to try to make sure that like there's as much person-to-person connection on the other side of things. Once there is that connection, and there's also a much higher incidence rate of doing a review. Right? On Airbnb, it's in the 60-70% range, which is pretty high.
Nice. Well, I'd like to also ask one more question. This came from Roland. Is that how does reputation scale from people to brands?
A good point.
To you. This is directed to you.
So I mentioned earlier that brands extend into people, right? So if you are a Harvard grad, it extends into you. If you are, if your customer is Apple, it extends into you. If you are, if you work for McKinsey, McKinsey extends to you, right? The opposite way, it also happens, but more softly. I think that, in fact, in the focus that we're putting inside our own company is to focus on freelancers. And the reason for that is that freelancers are the combination between person and company. So they're on their own brand, right? So it's like the combination of both in one single person. I think that the reputation of people cannot affect their companies as much. It can happen if they get a lot of PR from a little story, but it's not going to be as heavy as the other way around.
Yeah.
There is a lot of symmetry.
Well, I think what really is interesting about the crowd economy is because it's kind of like a blend, like in digital and a physical world. So that's where the things are really happens. Where like if it's happening only in the digital world, then you just have.
No, but even in the offline world. So imagine that imagine that Anne, who was the Harvard doctor, is a terrible doctor, right? That's going to hurt the reputation of Harvard.
Yeah.
It's just that it will have to be many Annes to hurt Harvard before Harvard loses their reputation for being a good school for medicine. It would take a lot. The other way around is much easier. So so Anne automatically benefits from the brand of Harvard.
Was the question? What was it? Yeah. There.
Hi, my name is Pranesh. One question that comes to me is, do you have a problem with respect to the multiple profiles of the same person on different platforms, and how do you see a kind of a trend with respect to the geography? That this geography we see more number of people with multiple profiles, and so when you have this kind of problem, how do you deal with a single currency or single factor?
Yeah, so identity management is one important part of providing trust. So you're that one person, and you're not unable to sort of come back on the platform again just with a different email. That's the lowest barrier. So there are providers for this. We work with one called Jumio that helps with identity verification, and we sort of identify like this is the same person as another person. The other half of it is also looking at other signals around looking at credit cards and so on, where these are pretty unique identifiers of the same person. But being able to identify this, I think again this is another space where identity management, identity verification is a space where I think a lot of innovation can happen still.
So, question about regulation. Just moving on to a different topic here. There's general consensus that sharing economy companies are not regulated or underregulated. What is your thoughts on that? I mean, your perspective. I'm sure you're getting a lot of backlash as well, and I want to hear your side of the story.
Sure. I think the way we look at it is just that, like any kind of innovative or new business ideas or new technology breakthroughs, regulations are not necessarily set up an aura in place to manage new technology. So, if you look a bunch of years back, you look at companies like Skype. When they first came on board and sort of there's this whole void thing, companies were asking, like, should we regulate it like a telco? Should they have like a 999 line that is always available and so on? So there are always these kind of questions when new technologies come out, and over time, regulators catch up and they figure out how to deal with it. And then it's the same in the sharing economy. I think here the energy of the spectrum comes into play again, right? You have, if you are sharing a ride with your friend and you're sending your friend to school, or dropping them off at the office, right? No regulations, you're free to pick them up, no big deal, no transaction happens. On the other end of things, like if you're a taxi, right, there's regulations around like how often you check your car, you need a taxi license and so on. That's a business.
Right.
The sharing economy, again, if you're doing a ride-sharing business, you're somewhere in between, right? You're doing on an occasional basis, you're taking a transaction, you're collecting some money out of it by dropping someone off, but it's somewhere in between. So it's not going to be a case of no regulations on one end, but it's also a bit unfair to sort of say that like they run as a business and you sort of have them check the tires and do the same kind of regulation. So I think most companies in this space are working with governments around the world to find out what's that middle space, and we're fast like getting there, as fast as governments can move, right? But we'll get there over time. It's not, it's just a matter of time. You look further back, it's Skype, Amazon, just sending books around the world, like, what about censorship, tax, and so on.
Right.
Yeah, it's difficult, but it gets sorted over time.
Yeah, you're working with a completely new web, and the laws have to be disrupted. I mean, you've disrupted the space. There's a lot of new ways of doing things, but the laws are still, very, very outdated.
The rules are set up for different reasons, right?
Right.
And so the question is, how do you adapt them to get all the benefits of the sharing economy and minimize any kind of downsides that they see that original rules were set up for?
So I come from a culture where we try to live by honor codes, and there are still elder meetings when there's a situation where you try to come up with the best solution. And I know of a case where somebody did something to someone and they were accused, and then they had to leave the country because the person who accused them was just lying. But when I think about having a reputation online, if a lot of people complained about that same person, they wouldn't have a case. So I'm just wondering, do you think that this might be the future of the legal system?
I think that it will help with dealing with asymmetry. When you deal with somebody, in most cases, the biggest layer of risk is the lack of information. I think that what this will help us with is having more information so that you can make the best choices possible. I think it's about making decisions and making choices. Could it be used for legal, for criminalism, and for... I'm not sure. I think that crime is a very specific event that happens, and that is not so connected. It may be connected to a particular transaction. It would not be connected to the fact that you had bad reputation before. I would very much doubt today that the fact that you got a few 3 stars or 2 stars from some kind of platform would affect a trial, and I think it would be unfair, actually. I think that it has to be measured for the event. Could it bias people? Maybe it could bias people, but I think that in most cases, more for the commercial case, like I'm not willing to drive with Anne, I would rather go with Beth. I think that the commercial implications today are far greater value than the criminal or legal. And I say this also based on data. I think that that additional $2 that you can charge for your reputation, it can happen with every transaction in the world. But a platform or a peer-to-peer platform or sharing economy has very few cases of theft, of delinquency, of criminalism, very, very few. In fact, I was talking to a company that does car rentals. It's not drive sharing, but they actually, you rent your car to somebody, you give somebody your keys, and in about 10,000 transactions, nobody stole a single car. This is quite, as I mentioned, it's very humane, right? I'm sure that Enterprise, Rent-A-Car, or Avis, they probably have higher theft levels than them.
I think over time, it's a super interesting question, actually. I think over time, it might get there. We're very far from it, right? If you think about what kind of stuff are being used in the courts in terms of admissible evidence for courts and so on. It's stuff that it's not always 100%, right? DNA evidence, they're all like 99, 98%. There's some level of uncertainty, right? The question is like, what's that threshold, and will reputation systems ever get there? We are so far from it now; it's hard to imagine. But maybe, right? Maybe one day reputation systems are at that level, and it gets there. But some way to go.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. I think we need to wrap it up. So.
Yeah, we're totally out of time. So also, please feel free to grab the panelists during lunch. So thank
Great.
you, both of you.
Thank you.
It was great.
Great meeting you.
So Priti,